Welcome back. For those watching by video, it's been 2 months, but I just happened to wear the same shirt. I'm just kidding. So, in last lesson, we were talking about fear and favor, about how we zoom back more and more. And I'm going to start with a story I didn't have time to mention in the last one. I've only shared this once before. It was actually in a Bible study with some of you. But once, when I was in Russia, actually, I was falling asleep. And right as I was in that middle stage of like, I'm sort of asleep, but not completely thing. Anyway, all of a sudden, I just felt like I zoomed back on everything, on time and space. It was the most bizarre thing where suddenly I just zoomed back and I could see everything happening all at the same time, just whoosh. And it was very quick. It only lasted a few seconds, but suddenly I could just see everything. Past, future, present, everything around the whole world. I don't know how to describe it. It was very weird. As that happened, though, my first thought was just, I zoomed back, see everything, and my first thought was, why would I ever not trust God? Because once you see everything from that perspective, it's kind of like, God's got me. And then it went away. And so that's kind of where I got the concept of that last lesson. Part of it is zooming back. The more we see from God's perspective, it will see the world differently. And so last lesson was about the fear of the Lord. And it's not about being afraid of God. It's about appreciating who He is, because it's actually an empowering thing. It's actually something that changes our life, because suddenly we realize who's on our side and whose child we are. So now that was the big picture. In this lesson, I want to talk about the little picture. So I want to cover both sides of things. And this one is called creating culture. So first of all, when I refer to culture, I'm not referring to museums or ballet or wine tasting or anything like that, right? I'm not talking about different countries or different subcultures. I'll use some of those as examples, but that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to your personal culture. I'm referring to business culture, to family culture, church culture. You know, like at the beginning of the school year, I was talking about Charis's culture, things like that. Culture is very subtle, and so it gets overlooked a lot. See, it's not a one-time decision. You can't say, this is my culture, the end. Ta-da, that's our culture. It doesn't work like that. Culture is a lot of little decisions, countless little decisions. It's something that you have to cultivate. It's not a seed that you chuck and you walk away. It's a garden that you tend to. Right? And so I want to quickly go over the what, why, and how. I'm mostly going to talk about how. But first of all, what is culture? Culture is beliefs and behaviors that affect daily life. You know, what's normal? What's accepted? What's taboo? What's encouraged? What's celebrated? How do people talk to each other? What's considered fun? That's culture. What's awkward or shameful? That's culture. What's common sense? What are common skills? You know, what's expected knowledge? What's the lingo? You know, you hang out with somebody who has a hobby in common with somebody else, and they'll talk in all this lingo that you might not understand because they're into that, right? And so that's culture. You know, a few examples. You know, in the United States, we're very individualistic. You know, in our TV shows, in our media, all these different things, people talk about, you know, it's my right for this. Or you know, the moral of the story of a kid's movie is always like, follow your heart. You know, do whatever you feel you should do. You know, be true to yourself. That's a big one. Be true to yourself. And we assume the whole world's like that, and that's right for everybody. Not every culture is like that. In some cultures, they don't encourage you to be yourself. They encourage you to fit in. You know, in some cultures, they encourage you take it easy. In other cultures, they encourage you to work hard. Right? It's a cultural thing. To me, it's very helpful to live in multiple cultures, because it opens your eyes to, okay, this isn't how everybody is. This is how my culture is. I thought everybody's like this. I was seeing through the filter of my culture, and now I realize actually those parts weren't for everybody. Again, like I talked earlier in the year about missionaries, where if a missionary goes somewhere and they can't separate their culture from the gospel, they'll start preaching their culture. You need to be like this, you need to be like that. You have to wear a collared shirt or you can't be born again, right? You have to wear pants and shoes, and you can't wear sandals, you can't do this. And people start to connect the two together, and then when you know, it's important to be able to separate and say, no, what's actually the gospel and what's God's heart for everybody, and then what's cultural. And it doesn't mean that it won't impact the culture. There's some cultural things that aren't from God. You know, when I was in Chile, I use a lot of examples that might, anyway, when I was in Chile, I used to watch a lot of cartoons, like I've mentioned. I like cartoons, video games. I like all kinds of silly stuff. I thought I'd outgrow it. I never did. So in Chile, though, because it's kind of close to Japan and the United States, it's equally close to both. I grew up watching American cartoons and Japanese cartoons. I grew up, and that was just normal. Everybody watched both there. And I noticed something very interesting. In all of the American cartoons, everybody, the superheroes, they would get their superpowers for free. It was like, I got bit by a spider and now I'm Spider-Man. I'm from another planet, now I can do this. And almost all of them got it through something free. Something happened to me and now I get all these cool things. I won the jackpot, right? And it reflects the culture. In the Japanese cartoons, almost all the superheroes got their powers through training really, really hard. And you'd see this. So it's like they got theirs for free. They trained really, really hard. One of my favorites is One Punch Man. And he trained so hard, his hair fell out, and now he's invincible. But it was through that training. He did 100 push-ups. Anyway, I won't go into it. So anyway. But again, you see, it's a different cultural thing. In America, we value getting things like hitting the jackpot. I'm special just because I'm me. In other cultures, they value, if you want to be special, you have to work for it, right? When I was studying Korean in the Air Force, and again, I'll explain it all later if I haven't in the past, but I was in the Marines and anyway, Air Force. Anyway, but one of my Korean instructors said, in America, when you say goodbye, you say, take it easy. He said, in Korea, we say, sugohaseo. We say, work hard. He said, it's totally different. In America, you're like, take it easy. What you want is to be able to relax, take it easy. In Korea, he says, no, that's shameful. In Korea, it's work hard. And that's how so everybody's encouraging that. When I was in school in Chile, for a couple years, I went to a Chilean school. Before I spoke Spanish, they threw me into a Spanish-speaking school, and I don't remember learning it. I suddenly knew it. I wish it were that easy now. It doesn't work that way anymore. I was a child at the time. And so in Chilean schools, the teacher would write stuff on the board, and I would write it down, and I'd memorize it. And that's how we did school. You just memorize what the teacher writes. Then I went to an American school, and there it's different. There you hardly ever memorize. There it's more about understanding the concepts. And so sometimes one culture is 100% better than another culture, but usually there's pros and cons. We can say, well, I like this more about that culture, I like that more about that culture, or we lean too far this way, they lean too far that way, something like that. And it's not just at a country level. In a family, when my mom was growing up, her parents told her, children should be seen and not heard. Stay quiet, don't talk. You're not allowed to talk, don't get involved, Not every family's like that. Some parents encourage that. Some parents say, don't ask questions. Stop asking questions. It's so annoying. Other parents are like, no, ask questions. Ask everything. I grew up with Barry Bennett as my dad. I asked a lot of questions. It played to his strengths. And so, again, some parents encourage their kids when they play sports, just go out there and have fun. The most important thing is for you to have fun. Other parents say the most important thing is for you to win. Get out there and win. And see, some people say, oh, that one's horrible. That's horrible parenting. And other people say, well, that's horrible parenting. But see, it's different goals. See, some parents are thinking, I want you to have a fun memory. Other parents are, this is a good opportunity for you to learn skills that will affect you the rest of your life. I want you to learn how hard work pays off. Right? So different goals affect the family culture. In the military, I was in Marine boot camp for 3.5 months and I got sick. I got pneumonia pretty bad. Anyway. And so I didn't actually graduate that. That's why I was in the Marines and the Air Force. I went to Air Force years later. But when I was in Marine Corps boot camp, it was very different than Air Force boot camp. Not as different as I thought it would be, but it was very different. Because in the Marines, they talked about, it's Marines, Army, Navy, Girl Scouts, Air Force. And so it's very hard to go from the Marines to the Air Force. It wasn't as easy as I was expecting it to be, but there was a different mindset. See, in the Marines, it's a lot longer. Air Force was 6 weeks, Marines was 13 weeks. Of boot camp. I've spent 5 months of my life in various boot camps. And so in the Marines, they really instill, we're in this together. So in the Marines, if somebody was walking by with a tray of food and they drop it, everybody just jumps up and helps them clean up and gets back together because you get punished together. That's how they encourage it. And so it's like, oh, you didn't drop that, we dropped that. I'm gonna help you clean that up right away so that we don't get punished. Right? In the Air Force, it was totally different. They didn't punish you together, they punished you alone. So if you dropped something, everyone around you laughed at you. So I was like, this is very different culture. It wasn't like that everywhere in the Air Force, but in some parts. And so, I liked one more than the other, I'll admit that. I mean, I love the Air Force, but boot camp was different. So, how is culture related to wisdom and maturity? And the simple answer is it affects everything. Culture affects everything. Like I mentioned before, we can have all these big picture goals, all these ideals, all these dreams, but how do we actually get there? So you can sit around all day, and I love to do this. I love to think of what I want for my life, what I want my life to look like. Okay, but how do you do that? I don't want to be all talk. I want to get there for real. So the little picture is how we reach the big picture. And one thing that God showed me once was the little picture is the big picture. See, lots of times in stories, even in the Bible, you can read, and then Paul taught in this country for 2 years. And then this happens. And you read the book of Acts, and you read it, in an hour or two, and it's easy to miss the fact, like, this was decades. This was a lot of time that happened here. And so you read, and Paul taught for 2 years, and we're like, wow, how cool. But no, Paul was, for 2 years, what it means was he'd wake up, whatever they did there to brush their teeth, he probably did that, bathe, go to school, teach people, eat lunch, hang out with friends, laugh, study the scriptures. It was just very mundane. See, when you hear something as a story, it's very easy to forget that it was actually mundane day to day. Because see, the big picture is when you summarize the little picture. It's a bunch of little tiny moments that add up and add up and add up. And then when you tell people later on, it's like, oh, wow, that's super cool. It's kind of like when you watch like 80s movies where they have that montage of somebody working out. And you see like, I'm gonna train super hard. And next thing you know, it shows like 5 minutes of this cheesy song. And they're like punching and running and dragging something. And 5 minutes later, it's kind of like, whew, that was a crazy 2 months. But now look at me. I'm ripped and I'm the best boxer in the world or something. Right? You skip past all that. But see, real life isn't like that. There's no soundtrack music, as much as I would love soundtrack music. That's one of my, anyway. I would love just to walk the halls and have like music playing. And there's no soundtrack music. You don't fast forward. You have to live each and every single moment. It's tiny little decisions that add up. And when you tell people, see, my whole life I grew up hearing all these stories and getting inspired by them. And I was like, when will my life look like one of those? And that's when God showed me the little picture is the big picture. It'll never look like one of those because those are summaries. You'll never live a summary. You'll live a moment. And then when you get to the end, you'll look back and then you'll see the summary of what it was. Right? It's those tiny little moments of faithfulness that don't seem like a big deal. So, what does the big picture look like in this tiny moment? Those add up. Our thoughts turn into actions. Our actions turn into character and habits. Our character and habits turn into our destiny. See, that's how you get to the big picture from the little picture. Culture is like the soil that determines what can grow in it. Your daily life affects where you get. Because you can have all the big dreams in the world, but since you never realize this tiny moment is part of that. Me picking up this piece of trash, that's actually how I'm going to get to being the person that I want to be. But see, if you're like, no, I want to be this kind of person. I want to be like Moses. Or I want to be like Paul. And so you're like, no, these things are insignificant. That's not how I'll get there. It's like, no, those little moments, saying hi to somebody, seeing somebody who looks discouraged and going up and encouraging them, buying somebody coffee, or witnessing to somebody and they reject it. It's little moment are actually how you walk out who you want to be. See, the big picture inspires the little picture, but the little picture is how you get there. Every individual moment. So I want to talk about how to be intentional about our culture. Because see, culture again is about the moment by moment life of every single day. You will have a culture no matter what. You don't get to choose, I'm just not going to have one. There will always be a culture. But the question is, will you be intentional about it? If you're not intentional about your culture, if you don't cultivate it, it'll just become a reflection of your strengths, of your weaknesses, and of other loud voices. Because see, something's going to happen. And if you aren't intentional, it'll just turn into whatever it is. And it will have good things because of your strength, but it will also have bad things because of your weaknesses. And then anybody else who's coming alongside will start to impact it also. And I'll go into that more in a little bit. So, how to create culture? There's 3 main ways. First one is be intentional. Next one is be consistent. And then be creative. So I'm going to first talk about being intentional. First of all, you need to clearly define your goals. What is your goal? Not just where am I going, but how do I want to get there? So you might say, I want to be rich. Okay, but how do you want to be rich? What do you want your daily life to look like on the way? What do you want your daily life to look like after you get there, right? Habakkuk 2, verse 2. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. You have to make this clear and easy to understand, or no one else can do anything with it, right? It'll only be personal culture. It won't impact anybody else. If you can't put it into words, it dies with you, or people have to guess. And now everybody's guessing slightly differently. I think this is the culture. I think this is the priority. You know, if in your family, you're like, this is the culture I want for my family. If you never are very clear about it, everyone else is kind of like, well, I thought that this is what we were going for. Well, I thought that's what we were going for, right? Everyone will be on different pages. And so I'm not just talking about having a vision statement or a mission statement. This is bigger than that. It can be influenced by that. That's a good way to crystallize something. But this is more than that. It's about how you do what you do, not just what you're doing. So it's about your own life in a church, in a family, in a business, in anything in life, any place where you have a sphere of influence, any place where there's people, there's a culture. In your circle of friends, there's a culture. You know, some companies want to be the cheapest, and that's their culture. We want to be if whoever wants to save money, come to us, you know, the Walmart model. It's like, we'll be absolute cheapest. Other companies intentionally don't want to be the cheapest. Right? You got places like Nordstrom or wherever where it's like, we want to be expensive on purpose because we're trying to attract different people. We want people who don't care about money, who care about quality. You know, and then you have the other side. Well, we want people who care about money, not about quality. Right? And so there's different priorities based on what you're after. But if you don't define that, if the same store tried to have both, you know, if Walmart said, we're going to have like a luxury spa, would I really go to Walmart for a luxury spa? That's not what I think of when I go there. Like, I wouldn't trust them. Like I said, I wouldn't trust them for a back rub or something. I'd be like, no, thank you. So anyway, what are the priorities of the culture, though? That will affect how you set the tone, what atmosphere you're trying to create. You know, you go to one restaurant and it's really expensive, but they have this ambiance that you really enjoy. That's why, to me, you know, you always hear people who are like, turn on the lights during worship. You know, the heaven's going to be full of light. And other people are kind of like, dim the lights during worship. I just want to focus on God. And it's like, what's a preference thing, right? If you try to do both, no one's happy. You guys, sometimes the leader just has to pick. And so, you know, at Disney, for example, their vision isn't, we want to be the cheapest possible source of entertainment. That is not their vision. Their vision is, their actual mission statement is, we create happiness. They didn't mention money in there. We want to do really make people happy, right? I'm not endorsing Disney. I'm just using lots of examples. They're not saying we're the least expensive. They're not saying we're the cheapest or easiest, most convenient. They're saying, like, we want to be the best. We want to be the top notch in the world in this. So in a church, for example, if you're a pastor in a church, and again, I'm speaking from a leadership perspective, but you can apply this to any area of your life. Do you want people to value missions? Do you want operating in the gifts to be normal? Do you want people to be generous? Do you want them to be generous toward the church? Do you want them to be generous toward each other? Do you want church members to like each other and be friends? Or do you want them just to show up and be kind of acquaintances? Do you want servanthood to be a big thing? Do you want evangelism to be a big thing? Do you want discipleship to be a big thing? Do you want dancing to be a big thing? Do you want them to minister to each other? Or do you want them to only ministered to by approved people in the front? All these are different things where I'm not saying one's right, one's wrong. These are different areas of focus where you can't focus on everything or it's not focus anymore, right? By definition. In a family, do you want prayer to be normal? You know, some families grow up and they're like, oh, we all pray, but we've never seen each other pray. We just assume that we all pray, right? Or do you want that to be normal? Do you want, you know, your kids to lay hands on each other when they're sick or something? Do you want that to be normal, or it's kind of like, no, we do that at church? Do you want to make risk-taking not be taboo? You know, I was reading a book about somebody who said that in her childhood, her parents encouraged failure. They said, I want you to fail at something every single day. Because if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. I want you to constantly be pushing and stretching. And so every single day at dinner, they would celebrate noble failures. I tried something I've never tried before, and I failed. You know, because if you tried 3 things and you succeeded at all, we'll try a 4th one. Keep trying until you reach a limit, and now let's work on that one, right? So they celebrated that, and so it encouraged risk-taking. Some families are like, no, play it safe. And if you fail, it's kind of like, what's the matter with you? Are you stupid? You know, and so you see a total difference. In one family, I failed at something. Awesome. That means you're pushing yourself. I love it. I love that you're trying. I love you're not giving up. Another family could be like, you failed. How embarrassing. Never try anything you might fail at, right? And so it's a different culture. And that one, I actually do think one's better than the other. Do you want everyone in your family to feel safe and share their thoughts? Or do you want to be the faith police? You said something, don't talk, don't say it, don't talk. Do you want to be like that, or do you want people to be able to talk and then have that dialogue where you encourage them, right? And again, there's different reasons behind each. Different family, God loves creativity and variety. I'm not saying there's one specific way to do things, but you and God need to work out, what do I want my culture to be? What do I think is important? Do you want your family to be full of close relationships or just acquaintances who live together? Right? Because you can see both. And usually no one says that they want one. Like, I want to be acquaintances with my family. Let's just be roommates. Usually no one says that. That usually just happens by accident because we're not being intentional. Right? Again, so we want to be intentional because some of these sound terrible, and yet we see them everywhere. And the reason we see them everywhere is because they just happen by accident. They're the default nature of things. Right? If you aren't intentional, it won't happen by accident. So some examples in a business. For example, McDonald's or any fast food chain. In a place like that, you say, I want teenagers to get paid minimum wage to run a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So what we need is amazing technology, amazing systems where they get no creativity and no freedom to make decisions, right? And so that's a system. But see, what if everything were like that? You don't want that everywhere. And that's why people usually, that's a stage in their life, but they're like, I want more because I want to be able to make decisions, right? And so not every industry is like that. Imagine if every artist, they're like, I'm in an artist company. I want everyone to draw the exact same thing, exact same way like that. It's like, well, no, you want to train people till you trust them. You want to train people in the culture, in the core, so that they can be different. What if, like think of teachers or police officers or all these different things. You can't just say, here's the system, just follow the system perfectly with no thinking. You say, no, I need you to understand our culture and our hearts, so that when you have to make a judgment call, you make the right one. Right? And so different industries are different. You don't want a doctor to only know what they were specifically taught. You want them to be like, well, I haven't seen this before, but I've learned some basics that will help me approach this situation. So, in family, in the kingdom, in many industries, you don't want clones who don't think. You want uniqueness flowing from the same core. Same in the body of Christ. See, sometimes we try to apply the mass market mentality to the gospel when the gospel is the most personal thing in the world. And so you can't just say, I'm going to create, a system so that no one else ever has to think. They just have to copy what I did, right? Here's the only way to witness to people. That's it. There you go. Copy me. And instead, what Jesus did is he raised disciples. He said, I want you to have the same heart that I have. He actually gave us the same spirit that he has so that we can think like he thinks and make decisions like he makes decisions. So that in the moment when we're confronted with something we've never seen before, we're not just saying like, what did the teacher tell me to do? It's, no, God is inside of me. Therefore, I can use my creativity and solve this situation with him, even though I've never heard of this before. So on a side note, don't limit what you want to the opposite of what you don't want. I've touched on this before. But for example, if you say, my parents were abusive, so I'll never discipline my kids, and you just run the opposite direction, right? Or my boss was a jerk, and so I want to be best friends with everybody, like in the office. Or if you say, right? If you say, my pastor never taught grace, so I'm only going to talk about grace. I'm not going to talk about anything else in life. I'm only going to talk about how people who don't believe in grace are wrong. Right? And so don't just say, I want the opposite of something I hated. This horrible thing happened to me, I'm going to do the opposite of that. Take a step back and say, what's God's best? I don't want to limit myself. If you say, I grew up in an alcoholic home, so I want the opposite of an alcoholic home. Okay, but there's so much more to life than not being alcoholic, right? It's, okay, step back and say, no, what all is there? I don't just want to run from darkness. I want to see everything that's in the light, not just the things that are obvious because I had the opposite experience. But now one important key with this, I'm saying be clear, is that with clarity, you have to limit what you're focused on. See, if you say, here's the things that I want my family culture to be, and you list 1,000 things, that's too many. That's not focus. And so you need to simplify and condense it down to a few things that you can remember. Now it can branch out from that. So you can say, these are the 3 things that are priorities. In these 3 things, there's a lot of other things, but these are the core so that we can keep this in mind. If you make it too many things, it's the same as not having a culture. If you try to say it's everything. So next point, cast the vision. Paint a picture in people's minds of what it will look like. You want people to be able to see what you're seeing. See, if you say, this is the culture that I want, in your own life, in your family, in your ministry, whatever it may be. If you say, this is the culture that I want, I can see it. Okay, but can other people see it? Is it just a list of words on a piece of paper, or can they visualize it the same way you can? Can you actually picture, a church where everybody's giving words of prophecy to each other? Can you picture that? Okay, now can you get that to other people to where they can picture that, right? Sometimes it can be a memorable statement or a list of values. It can also be explanations of what you mean, but it can also be stories. One great way to help people visualize things is to share stories. So I've given a lot of examples already, like Disney or like Nordstrom. If somebody comes to your church and you say, oh, let me tell you what happens at our church. If you walk into a new church and they say, sometimes the pastor says, everyone grab your offering and now find someone else in the room and give it to them. You'd be like, whoa, that's really cool. Because one of the values of this church is generosity. We want you to bless each other, right? And so by telling a story, everyone's like, that's super cool. I gave a person my ring and somebody gave that person whatever, and someone gave me a truck, and I gave, as you start telling the stories, you're painting a picture. People are like, whoa, I can see it now. It's not just words now, like be generous. Okay, but if you paint a picture, this is what generosity looks like. Like I said, like with Disney World, because I studied them in college, actually, that's why I have some examples from them, is there's people, like there's one time, somebody was standing like next to Splash Mountain or something. They're standing there watching and they got soaked. And somehow they didn't realize that would happen. So they got really upset. They're like, I'm soaked, I'm drenched. And so somebody was walking by, a staff member, and said, oh, you look unhappy. Let me take you to a gift shop and I'm going to give you new clothes for free that are dry. And then we're going to dry clean your clothes and have them delivered to your hotel. And so when you tell new staff members that story, they're like, whoa, we can do that? That's really cool. I want to be able to do that. When you tell customers that, they're like, whoa, they do that kind of stuff? Like my wife and I, when we were there a few years ago, she dropped her ice cream cone. Like we just bought ice cream in Little France or whatever. And we're walking out and she's licking her ice cream cone. Or she didn't even lick it yet, I think. She bends over to pick up a napkin. She dropped an ice cream cone, just fell. And a janitor saw it. And the janitor ran up and he's like, oh my goodness, the princess dropped her ice cream cone. And so he's like, oh, come with me, come with me. And he escorted her to the front of the line and said, please get another ice cream cone for free for this princess. And so they gave it to her and she walked away and we were like, that's so cool. We're still talking about it, right? Because it's a picture where you can say, this is what I have in mind. So if you think about that, now if you're training janitors and you say, here's a story of what you can do, they're like, oh, I get it. Okay, I can go above and beyond. That's really cool. I'm going to do that stuff. And see, when you tell customers, this is what they do here. This is, so if you say to your company, this is the kind of stuff I want to go for, it's like, okay, I'm getting a picture of what you're talking about. I've heard people mention, again, I walked into this one church and I was overwhelmed with love as soon as I walked in the doors. I walked in and I just got greeted and I got prophesied over and someone gave me money and all these things. I walked in, it blew me away. I've never been in a more loving environment. When you paint that picture with specific examples, everyone starts thinking like, oh, I want to do that too. That sounds really fun. I want to do that too. So when you share stories and things like that, first of all, it creates expectation. First in your team or in your family, and then also in the customers or your kids or whoever, So, say spouses are talking, and here's the kind of things I want to do in our family. When you paint that picture, now both spouses are like, okay, yeah, I love that too. And you bounce it around, you come up with more ideas. And then you start saying, okay, now that we know what we want, we'll start painting that picture to our kids also, and so that they expect this kind of thing. And then the next thing, it creates expectation, but then it also creates momentum. Once you start doing this and living this, it gets easier and easier and easier. And so that's why clarity is so important. So for example, if a kid says, wow, I told my parents something and they didn't blow up at me, they listened, asked me questions, and they encouraged me or they corrected me, whatever. Okay, I have this expectation now. They want me to talk. If a kid comes home from school and they say, oh man, I'm so excited, this and this and this happened, and the parents kind of like, okay, cool, whatever, and turns up the volume to listen better. Could you hush? I'm in the middle of something. Okay, that creates an expectation, that creates a negative momentum. Right? But if a kid comes home and says, I had the most amazing day, and you're like, tell me everything. I want to know about it. I care about your day, right? That creates a different expectation where now the next time something exciting happens in their life, I can't wait to get home and tell my parents, right? So again, you build this momentum. And that's a family example. It happens in a church. It happens in a business. And so clarity is important because if you have 100 things you want to do, you can only mention them once a year, right? But if you have like 3 main things or 1 or 2 main things, 5 maybe, I don't know, You figure out what works for you. But if it's a few things, you can mention them over and over and over. And you can keep instilling it. And so again, you don't have to say the exact same thing, exact same example every time. There's different ways to go about it. So for example, let's say you have a family, and if you don't have a family, put these on the shelf for later, because like now I get to put into practice things that I've been dreaming of for years and years and years. And so I used to be like, oh, I want to be like that. Like I was telling somebody recently, part of why I'm so lovey-dovey with my daughter is because I saw Mike Pickett be lovey-dovey with his daughter. Like I was on a Russian, like I used to see him be like, I love you so much, I love you so much. And I was like, you're a dude, man. Like, what are you doing? But I saw that and I was like, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know that you're allowed to act like that. And I was like, I want to be like that. Who doesn't want to be like Mike? And so I was on a 24-hour train ride in Russia with Mike Pickett. And so it's him and I and a couple other people going to central Russia. He's on this cell phone, and all these Russians, incredibly stoic. And he's like, I love you, baby girl. I love you. I love you. And everyone's looking around like, what? And he didn't care. And I was like, I want to be a dad like that. I want to not care. I want to love my daughter and not care what anybody else thinks about me, because she's more important to me than what they think about me, right? So again, you see an example and you're like, I want that. I want that. So again, even if you're not a pastor or a parent or a business owner, something like that right now, if you're not in leadership right now, say, okay, well, when I am, I want to do this. Right? You can put it on the shelf and it will come into play later. So say, for example, in your family, you say, I want my family to love each other and enjoy life together. Right? I think everybody would say that, but okay, how can I be intentional about that? And so you say, that's one of our values. I want us to like each other. Okay? So maybe one day you're at the store and you tell one of your kids, let's buy a present for this your sibling, for little Jimmy. Let's say. Let's buy them a present just for fun. What do you think would bless them today? Well, it's not their birthday. I know. Let's just buy them something for fun. What do you think would bless them? Oh, man, this is exciting. And so you're training them in generosity and thinking, oh, what would make them happy? Not what do I want, but what would they like? So again, that's a specific example. Or you might say, hey, let's all find a hobby that we enjoy together. Okay, because I'll get to that in a little bit. But let's find something that we enjoy together so we can do it together. And let's make this a priority. So that leads me to my next point. Invest in it as a priority. I was going to throw in a whole bunch of quotes, but I only put in one. John F. Kennedy. There are risks, or John F. Kennedy's speechwriter, I suppose. There are risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long-range risks of comfortable inaction. It's so easy to not be intentional about something, but that will lead to something that you don't want. That will lead to, when you look back and say, my life's not what I thought it would be, it's because of all these little moments weren't what you wanted them to be. But when if you say, I'm going to be intentional, then you'll look back and be like, wow, I didn't realize that's what my life looked like. I just was living it one moment at a time. So again, invest in it as a priority. There's always going to be something competing for your time, your thoughts, your energy, your attention, everything, your money. And so this will only work for you if it's a priority. You can't wait for there to be extra. You have to make sacrifices. Like I said, where I'm like, I have to give up video games, even though that was a big part of my life before I got married. But I was like, that's not the culture I want. I want family time. I don't just want something that I enjoy by myself. I want something I enjoy with my family, right? So I made a sacrifice where I said, instead of 30, 40, 50 hours a week, I'm going to cut it down to like 10 minutes a week, right? And that was a decision that I made, right? And so you make decisions based on your priorities. People can get all excited about goals, but if it's not a true priority, they'll get disillusioned. Because see, if it's all talk, if you tell everybody, this is what we're going to do, we're all about this. If you tell your family, we're all about family time and loving each other, and that only applies when they want to do something else. And then when you want to do something else, you're kind of like, well, no, I'm doing my thing right now. Go do something else. See, it backfires the minute they realize you don't mean it. And so, if a boss says, we're going to do this and this and that, or a principal out of school, hey, here's the vision. And if it's just one-sided, if it's all words, it backfires. It could even lead to a culture mutiny, where everyone's kind of like, this is what they say, but that's not what they actually mean. Here's what the culture is really like. And now it's even harder to be a leader in a situation like that, because you might say, this is what I want. And it's like, I don't believe you. I don't believe that's what you want. That's what you think you want, but your actions tell me I'm not important, right? And so we need to make it a priority. If you've lost that trust, or if someone's jaded from a past experience, it'll take a lot more patience to build this. Say, for example, if someone's adopted or in a foster care program and they've had bad family experiences, you might be like, well, here's our family culture. Just get on board with it. Okay, but it might take more patience because their trust has been burnt in other places or something. So it takes that time and patience to build this, but if it's a priority, you will. So next point is be consistent. You want saturation. You want the evidence of your priorities to be everywhere. What's important to you, like they say sometimes is, if someone looked at your bank account, would they think God's top priority in your life? It works for everything though. The evidence of your priorities should be everywhere. If you say my family's first, could somebody else guess that without asking you? Right? If you say I'm called to this, I'm called to that, this is what's most important to me, let the evidence of that be everywhere. In the Old Testament, you see all kinds of things where God says, build a monument, build a memorial, don't forget this, teach your children, don't forget this kind of stuff. There were feasts. Have a feast every year so you never forget this. You even said, put the word on your forehead, like different things where he's saying, don't forget, don't forget. We want to be saturated with what's important to us. We need reminders of in Israel back in the day, God wanted them to have reminders of their covenant with him, of his power, of his faithfulness, of his promises. And so it's big things and little things. How you decorate, how you dress, how you have fun, what you celebrate, what you talk about, what you learn about, what you care about, what you reward, what you do. All these things can reflect your priorities. So every single one of these is an opportunity to be intentional about your culture, because culture seeps into everything. You can't say this is my culture over here, but then all my free time is for this over there. It seeps into every single thing that you do. So next point is sow the fruit you want to see. If a church wants to see lots of healing, you need to talk a lot about healing. You need to sow a lot of healing. If you want to see prosperity and generosity, you need to sow prosperity and generosity. If you want to see creativity, you need to encourage creativity. If you want to see kindness, you need to sow kindness. If you want to see selflessness, sow selflessness. You need to talk about it. You need to teach it. You need to demonstrate it. Don't let it just be something that you talked about once and it's a plaque on a wall. Make it part of every single day life. If you want to reap something every day, you need to sow it every day. I remember back when God was teaching me about generosity years ago, and I realized I want to reap every day, so I should probably sow every day. And so I started giving every single day. And it changed my heart, changed how I thought about giving, because when I always used to give, sporadically as I felt led, and it was bigger gifts, but I was like, so I made goals for myself. For a while, I was like, I want to give $1 every single day. And I was like, but if I send $1 to somebody and they send me a receipt, the receipt probably costs them $1. So I would save up and give $7 at the end of the week. And then after a while, I got a better job because I was like, God, my heart's desire is to give, $10 a day. So then I got a better job and I was like, I can afford to give $5 a day. And then after a while of that, I was finally able to give $10 a day. And I loved it because that's like $300-ish a month, right? And I was like, I want to do this on top of everything else. So I was like, I want to, and it is something, I'm not saying you still have to do this, or I don't do this anymore currently, but for a season, that's what God put in my heart. He taught me so much through that because by sowing every single day, I started thinking about it differently. I started saying like, okay, I'm partnering with God. Who do I want to bless today? Who do I want to partner with today? What do I want to invest in? And I started seeing it as good ground, bad ground. And God started showing me never give out of obligation, only give when it's because you've purposed in your heart in advance. So start thinking differently about it. And so that was with giving, but the same can be for anything. I want to witness to somebody every day for a season, and that'll change how I think about that. And that might just be one season, and then later on you might shift into other things. You might want to. I want to give a word to somebody every single day. So, again, repetition. Do your kids, with the family example, do your kids see you praying? Do they see you reading the Bible? Do they see you talking about what God has shown you? Do they see you being generous? Do they see you turn the other cheek? Do they see you have quality conversations with people? Do they see this? Is it everywhere? And if not, what can you do about that? I grew up with both my parents where to me it was normal. I see them praying in tongues, see them reading the word, things like that. So to me, I was like, this is normal. This is our culture. This is what we do. We spend time with God. You lay down your life for God. If someone ever has to die to self, it'll be me, right? Because that's the culture that I was surrounded by. So if you want to see that kind of thing, you model it, right? So next point is protect it. Circumstances, flesh, the devil, strong personalities will try to mold the culture into their own image. It can even be people with good intentions that they just don't have the same vision that you have. See, someone could be like, no, this is good, so I'm going to push in this direction. It's like, yeah, but that's not what I want. That's not the vision God put in my heart. You go into ministry and someone's like, oh man, you should do this and do this and do that. that might be good for you, but don't push my ministry that direction. I'm going the direction God's called me to go, right? And so, loud voices will try to influence things. If you're a pastor, someone will show up who's like, I should be in charge. And they'll start to try and spread the word about how they know more than you and all these things. If you don't protect the culture, and maybe they are smarter than you in some area. Now imagine you have a church and you're like, I want us to have a strong prophetic ministry. And someone shows up who is very strong in the prophetic. But what if they have a different heart than you? And see, if you don't protect your culture, now they're going to start shifting it the direction they want to take it. And see, that's what happens a lot of times is we need to never be the person who's an Absalom who says, I know better, I'm going to take things my direction. Because if we're not the ones in charge, we need to be submitted to the vision that we're under. But again, people will show up and try to influence things, or the devil will try to influence things, right? Or again, circumstances, something will come against it. Like I used to spend, when I was in the Air Force in one base, I would spend like 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day, just walking along the coastline in Monterey, California. It was horrible. Just kidding, it was beautiful. I would walk along the coastline for hours and hours and hours a day, and I'd have a book with me, and I'd write down everything God would tell me. So I just pray and pray and pray and pray and pray and just be two-way conversation, writing down all kinds of stuff. And I loved it. Then I got stationed somewhere else where now I had nowhere to go and walk. So my circumstances were trying to tear away something, trying to impact my culture, right? No one had bad intentions, nothing like that. But my circumstances changed. So I had to be extra intentional, be like, okay, I don't want to accidentally stop doing this just because my situation changed and now it's harder. Right? Things will happen. You might say, well, I don't have this job anymore, I have that job, so I can't do this anymore. Okay, we can't just be blown around by the wind. Well, now it's easy to do this, now it's not easy to do this. Now I'll do it, now I won't. Right? If we're intentional, we'll say, no, I'm going to pay the price to do what I feel called to do. So again, we need to protect the culture. There's a famous book called Good to Great, and one of the examples in that is if you're in a business, if you're a leader of other people, first you want to get the right people on the bus, and you also want to get the wrong people off the bus. See, you need to protect the environment. Some people don't belong there. In a family, you might not fire one of your kids. Maybe once they're adults, you might. I don't know. But you might not fire one of your kids, but you might fire one of their friends, right? You have to protect. Some people need to go, and then and that'll actually help you attract the right people. I went to a Bible study years ago, and it was great. I went to it for like 2 years, and we all loved it. And all of a sudden, this one guy showed up. And he had horrible hygiene. He would talk the whole time. He was rude. He was just obnoxious. And little by little, the Bible study went from like 40 people to like 3 people. Everybody stopped going because the leaders didn't protect the culture. They didn't address it, and they let one person change the culture, turn it into something that nobody wanted, and everybody left. But see, when you protect it, now you actually attract people who want the same thing. If I tell a story about Disney like that, and someone's like, I feel called to be a janitor. I want to be a janitor at Disney now, right? You get attracted to the place where they have that same vision. And so that's one of the ways to protect is preemptively. If you have your kids in a great school and they're learning all kinds of stuff, all kinds of great scholarship opportunities, but it's turning their heart against God, what's your priority? Are you willing to make a drastic decision to protect your children, even though it's like, well, but it's great in this area? Yeah, you're raising a very successful non-Christian. Is that what you want? Again, are you willing to make those sacrifices? Are you willing to make changes? Because I tell my wife, I'm like, Olivia is our top priority because she's my top calling right now. Like I see her as full-time ministry, right? It's not like, here's my calling and then I have a daughter. No, she is my top ministry. And from that, I'll minister to other people, but she takes priority. So I was like, if I ever had to move to protect her, I would. I'd move to the other side of the world if that's what she needed me to do. Because everything else I do is for her to succeed, right? And, so again, different levels of priority. So it's like, what do I have to do to protect my church, protect my family, protect whatever it is that God's called you to be committed to? Are you willing to lay it all on the line and not just say, well, you're my top priority, but, it is what it is. You're going to a school like that, whatever, or that's your circle of friends, who cares? It's like, are you willing to be like, I'll move across the country, I don't even care. I'll die to self in every area of my life, because that's a microcosm of the bigger picture of saying, I don't care what the world has to offer me, I'm going to die to self and live for God. I don't care if I could be rich or famous, I don't care if I could do this or do that, I don't care if I could succeed in that, that's not my calling. Sometimes it's easier in life when you're not good at a lot of things, because then you're like, well, this is the only thing I'm good at, so I might as well do this, right? When you're good at a lot of things, though, it's different, because it's like, I could be good at that, or that. And now you have to say, okay, but which one's God called me to? Because I've never been to a country that I didn't fall in love with, and I've been to a lot of countries, and I love every single one I've been to for different reasons. And so if it was in my own strength, I could be like, I'm going to go to that one because it has a beach, or I'm going to go to that one because they have good food. But it's like, no, which one did God call me to? Not just what do I think, but where am I called to? Am I committed to that? So, different ways to protect it. First one is weeding out people in advance. In the Marines, I love their marketing. They don't say, come join the Marines, anyone can do it. They basically say, if you're good enough, come to us. If you're not, you can join the Army. I'm not saying this is accurate, but I'm saying that's their attitude, right? They present this, we're the best of the best, we're the hardest. We might not want you. But, that inspires people like, you might not want me. What are you talking about? Of course you want me. And so they're like, that's who we're after. We want people who hear that and aren't scared, right? And so that's how they protect their culture, is they try and scare people away who aren't interested. If you don't have this vision, don't come here. If you're not missions minded, don't come to this church, right? If you don't love the Lord, don't be my kids' friends. If you don't want to, again, you say, this is who we are, so don't even come here if this isn't what you want. That's one way to protect, is in advance. Universities look at test scores. Employers look at resumes. You try to protect in advance because it's much easier to hire the right people than to fire the wrong people, right? So another thing is making expectations clear and enforcing them. Some professors in universities, they'll lock the door. I said show up on time. You didn't show up on time, the door's locked. You miss out. We did that here by accident the first couple of days of school because the door is locked. Anyway, that wasn't intentional. Some professors are like, I don't care if you show up or not, it's up to you. Some professors are like, no, I do care if you show up or not. I'm going to make sure you pay attention. They have different goals. It's like if you've ever been in a movie theater and someone starts texting, or even worse, they start talking on the phone. If someone starts talking on the phone and no one on staff does anything about it, I'm not going back to that theater, right? And so you make the expectations clear and then you enforce them if you want to protect the culture. And then another thing is you limit options. See, even if something's good, it might not be good for your culture. When people start to have less and less in common, they start to drift apart. It takes wisdom to know when to do that. When there's a house with like 6 TVs and everyone's watching a different TV show, you have less and less in common. I grew up in Chile, which was kind of like America in the 50s or 60s or something. Like there's 3 channels when I moved there. So everybody in the whole country watched the same shows every night. So the next day, everybody could talk about them. And there's always like one big movie every Wednesday night. And so we'd all watch the same movie, and the next day we'd all talk about it. And so it created a unity where it's like, oh yeah, you were in Chile from this year to this year? I bet we watched the same shows. And you can talk about it, right? And this is a silly example, but it's true, it impacts culture. See, in America, you see the division that's happening because people have less and less in common with each other. But see, the same can happen in a family. If everybody has their own hobby, if every kid's in a different sport, you're just breeding disunity. Right? And so you want to limit options sometimes, because if you do everything, everyone's doing something different, there's no unity, you have nothing in common, nothing to build relationship with. And so, if you want to get to know somebody, and one thing I like to do is kind of like, if there's somebody that I, am good friends with, or somebody I admire, something like that, and it's like, what's your favorite book? I want to read your favorite book, because if that's interesting to you, it'll be interesting to me. And so the last one, and this one I'll skim over more quickly, is be creative. And I'm going to talk about this more in lesson 6, I believe. So you don't want to pursue changes for the sake of change, but don't be limited to what you've seen before. Look for creative ways to include your culture. How can you apply it during mealtime? How can you apply it to your decorations? How can you apply it in hallways? I was thinking, like, if you want prophetic to be big in your church, why not have like a little prophetic little notepad in the hallway where people can write a word and let the next person come by and read it? Like, oh, I don't even know who this is for, but God put this in my heart, and keep walking. And just come up with all kinds. Write it on toilet paper. Whoever uses this. So anyway, you can come up with all kinds of creative ideas to bring your culture into this. So I want to end in the last few seconds with some ideas just to spark something in all of you. You don't have to copy these, but hopefully it sparks some ideas. I want a culture where the supernatural is normal, where stepping out of the boat is celebrated, even if it doesn't work. I want it to be normal to pray and prophesy, lay hands, and give gifts. I want it to be normal to be spiritual without acting spiritual, where we can totally operate in the power of God without having to be in the zone. I want it to be normal to hear God's voice. I want it to be normal to have fun and be down to earth and also be powerful in our daily walk. For us to be able to laugh one minute, raise someone from the dead the next, step out of the boat and drown the next, or not drown, and fail the next, where it's just normal. You can be down to earth. I want it to be normal for iron to sharpen iron. I want the highlight of each day to be that unity we build with each other. And I want it to be normal for us to honor the word and to sow the word into us. Again, go down a list, just brainstorm, write a list. What do you want to be normal in your everyday life?